And thank you everyone for being here. It is a pleasure to be addressing you all and to get to tell you a little bit more about the considerations that emerge out of specifically culturally and historically sensitive data and what avenues there are for ethical data sharing within the archive space. I'll be speaking from the perspective of Digital Preservation Southampton, which is an initiative of the University of Southampton that seeks to empower organizations and professionals in the stewardship of their digital assets. So I'll be talking about some case studies from projects that we have carried out with partners, as well as conceptually what sort of conceptual commitments we adhere to. But I will also be speaking from my personal perspective as a researcher of the humanities and in my experience navigating the world of digital cultural heritage. One more thing, this talk will have some interactive bits where I would love for you to participate and contribute a bit about some questions that I'll be asking. So if you wouldn't mind popping over to vvox.app and putting in that ID right there. Oh, thank you so much for sharing the link. Or you can also scan that QR code. I'll be sort of opening some polls that you'll be able to contribute to. So I'll give you 2 seconds just to head over there. And all right. So I'd like to start this talk, but by taking you all back to the place where I first became concerned with this issue. Around 2021, I was an exhibitions development intern at the Field Museum in Chicago. And like many natural sciences and anthropology museums in the global north, the Field Museum grapples with a deep legacy of entanglement to colonial projects. Many of the museum's collections were inherited from the 1893 World Columbian Exposition in Chicago. This event was meant to celebrate the victory of Christopher Columbus' voyages, and thus included numerous artifacts from cultures that were once or continue to be under colonial subjugation. In 2021, the museum was undergoing an interesting turning point. This was the renovation of what was once known as the Native American Hall, which held objects pertaining to the indigenous peoples of North America, especially the Chicagoland area, collected by anthropologist Franz Boas, who at the time thought he was salvaging the remains of disappearing peoples. So I've got some images right here about what this hall used to look like. And I want to take a second and to sit with these images. And I'm going to open up a poll because I want to hear a little bit about, let me see if I can switch. Oh, wonderful. I want to hear a little bit about what these images make you feel. How would you feel if you were to visit the space as, you know, a learning scenario for these communities? What do you notice about the ways in which objects are portrayed? And yeah, I think you should be able to just contribute your thoughts by typing them up. And I'll just give you a couple minutes to write down some of your thoughts, and then I'll close it up and we'll read through some of them. I don't know if they're big enough here, but can I zoom into them? Oh yeah, I can zoom into them. Wonderful. Okay, so some of the things that we have, that some of the participants have said, it reads as uncomfortable, okay, somewhat clinical, which I think quite interesting, quite aseptic, yes, kind of devoid of any sort of, you know, effective character, sterile, looks stereotypical, detached, distant. Okay, polished, nice open space. Conflicted, sad. Okay, amazing. Well, these are all wonderful. I'm gonna close this in a second, but generally, I would say the exhibition halls were dark, monochromed, and pieces of clothing were worn by faceless mannequins, as we can tell here, in a kind of sort of, impersonal, dehumanized manner. The cultural heritage of the indigenous people of the Chicagoland areas was conveyed as homogenous, lifeless, and a remnant of the past. And no traces of the native communities that continue to inhabit these lands were visible. So I'm going to close this poll, and I'm going to switch back to our regular. Wonderful. So, a multi-year project that involved extensive collaboration with local communities resulted in a new exhibition titled Native Truths. This exhibition had the purpose of showcasing the ways in which Indigenous communities continue to practice and promote their cultural heritage today, while embedded in the realities and legacies of a colonial project. Objects are accompanied by testimonies of leaders testifying to their importance, contemporary practices of resistance such as basket weaving and music production, and these are emphasized for the public to interact with. So you can go in there and try to create your own music production. You can watch videos about what these practices are like. And at the opening of this gallery, members of the public as well as members of Indigenous communities gathered in a heartwarming celebration. And there I came face to face with the value of crafting an encounter with cultural heritage that is driven by care, by respect, and self-determination. So at this point, you may be wondering, what does all of this have to do with data? How does a collection, whether of objects or documents, housed at a museum, an archive, or a gallery, become data that management practitioners would be interested in? And this takes us to, for instance, the process of digitization, whereby collections and archives become data as we think of it today, data that is machine readable and can support computational research. Digitization, it can be as simple as scanning a document or photograph into a PDF or JPEG. Another form in which archives can become data is through the layout of metadata as data sets that can be shareable and findable by researchers and the public. When we digitize collections, for instance, documents and images, they become pixels that machine learning models can learn from, for instance. And when we share metadata, they become tags or search terms that a user can work with to support a certain inquiry, to create a certain kind of data analysis. There are also, for instance, born digital materials that come, for instance, a good example would be, I'm going to head back to the previous slide, this idea of musical heritage, songs that would come in the form of MP3s, recordings, those types of born digital materials that already exist within this digital space. And also legacy media materials, for instance, recordings that would come in CDs or cassettes that perhaps would not be the most stable medium, but still exist within the born digital space. So I'm going to come here. So once we start thinking about digital data and metadata, materials available on the web for researchers and for the public to use, this issue of data sharing follows naturally. You may have heard about FAIR principles in open research and science, which in the past decade have come to encourage researchers to render the research usable and findable by other researchers and communities. However, the impulse to make research open does not always sufficiently align with the interests and requirements of Indigenous cultural heritage and data. You may have also heard about the CARE principles, which emerged shortly after as a response to FAIR, and one that seeks to assert the self-determination of Indigenous people over their knowledge creation and to counteract historical misrepresentations in research and data, and to center the benefit of the concerned communities and data management practices. The word that these sort of initials spell out, I think, is very resonant. For instance, take this quote by artist Chris Pabon, a member of the Kansa Nation in the US, in response to the remodeling of the old Native American Hall. The museum has already begun to deinstall cases, and when I first saw those empty cases, it was a huge relief, knowing that all those pieces are now going to be handled with care. This note from open science researchers can also tell us a bit more about how to think about fair and care as two separate yet interconnected principles. Assessing the fairness of a dataset is typically a technical exercise, which can be done independently by the researcher to prepare the final dataset for reuse. On the other hand, the care principles require engagement with people to address the cultural, ethical, legal, and social dimensions associated with the intended uses of the dataset. Therefore, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to a care-driven project. To be driven by care requires conversation, relationship building, and at times, disagreement. While the care principles are thought of for Indigenous cultural heritage, I would argue that they are a helpful framework to think about many groups that have suffered under colonialism and oppression and marginalization. And I hope to make this a bit more clear throughout the rest of this talk. While open research principles encourage individuals to make as much information publicly available as possible for others to reuse, care principles encourage us to stop and think about what it is that we are sharing, who we are sharing it for, or as the theme of today indicated, whose data is it that is represented in a repository. I also want to talk a little bit about this article called The Crying Child by Temi Arumasu, which speaks of a collection of colonial photography from the island of St. Croix under Danish occupation. Arumasu reflects on the place of archives that were meant to demean, stereotype, and subject Afro-Caribbean individuals within a contemporary digital archive. She leaves us with these two quotes that I want to highlight. Alongside others who share the discomfort of unmediated access to and batch scanning of cultural memory, I too turn my attention to the colonial hauntings that follow photographed Afro-diasporic subjects from moment of capture through archive into code. So here she speaks about this sort of pipeline and these sort of analogous processes where violent processes that were found in analog archives, physical archives, often come to be reproduced into what we know as the digital archive and data space. Digitization has come with critiques of power, bias, and legitimacy, since the institutional drive to reproduce the excessive scale of the colonial project as big data enacts its own forms of erasure. These words remind us that the impulse to collect was endemic to colonial projects, and that the indiscriminate sharing of these objects can stand in the way of centering the needs and stories of these communities. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Digital Preservation Southampton and who we are, just to have some context for some of the case studies that we're about to get into. We are an enterprise unit housed at the University of Southampton. We're part of the digital humanities team. And we provide bespoke, flexible digital preservation training, consultancy, and data recovery for organizations in all sectors, empowering them to safeguard their collections into the future. So we do, and I specifically do, a lot of training around digital archive skills. So we have training on how to manage metadata, how to use different types of open source software for digital preservation, how to deal with legacy media. And we also provide strategies and solutions to partners in the field who are looking for advice on how to deal with various aspects of digital archiving. We also share some commitments, and we're a team of dedicated experts and educators with strong partnerships in the sector who aspire to help organizations through low-cost solutions to digital preservation challenges while supporting skills development in the field. So, for instance, we emphasize the use of open source software and other solutions that will be accessible to organizations and professionals in smaller settings and non-global north settings as well. So that is one commitment that we share. So now I'm going to talk to you briefly about a little piece of work that we did with a long-term partner, which was the Institute of Development Studies. And this was for a larger research project called the Middle East People's Cultural Conservation Collective, which basically sought to encourage and collect lots of what I would call homemade digital audiovisual data. So videos, images collected by or made by members of religious minorities in the Middle East, and find a way to make these shareable among the communities, and for these community members to be able to use these for their own purposes, for them to promote within their community and externally. Yeah, so that's basically what it was. And our specific task at this point was to create a way that was sustainable to share these materials, to orchestrate transfers, and a little bit about how we were going to go about storing all this data. So it was a lot of data, terabytes worth of data, videos, images that were all collected by people on their, for instance, personal phones. We encountered a few challenges. So for instance, the regions that we were working with experienced issues of connectivity and bandwidth. So connection to the internet, access to, for instance, services that, I don't know, commercial services that we usually use for file drop-offs was not always accessible for various reasons. Corporate solutions that we use, for instance, like instant messaging apps, would often compromise quality. And one thing that, for instance, we talk a lot about in digital preservation is that sort of avoiding that lossiness of information when you share data through methods that compress it greatly, because you end up with something that's basically not the exact image of your initial file, right? So this also became an issue. And of course, the high price of hot cloud storage, where we wanted this, we had a great size of data, but also limited funding in the humanities context and in the research project context. So we had to come of sort of think about a solution where storage would be sustainable in the long term. So what we ended up sort of coming up with was a bespoke infrastructure called a file browser. This is actually an application that's easy to sort of, that's out there. It's called File Browser, and that you can sort of adapt to your own purposes and connect to your own cloud storage sort of provider. And in this, we created an infrastructure of gradated access. So users would have personalized logins that would give them access to specific sections of the data that were relevant to their community, to their access controls. And this browser also had a component of minimal computing, meaning that it was very light, very, it was there for its purpose. It's not pretty. So it loads easily. It loads from various regions as well. And it's also meant to be sort of not a centralized structure for storage. So it's meant to be a place where people go to and then download their data, and then they generate copies in their own personal setups. So it's kind of this, these capillaries of data where we're not kind of this centralized place that sort of owns all the data, but rather we give the tools for individuals and community members to learn how to track the integrity of the files that they've downloaded, create backups, so that they kind of maintain that stewardship. And this speaks to a concept that's important in digital humanities, that of minimal computing. And I'm going to read a quote that sort of explains it a little. While data reparations must be made, our interest here is the development of present and future data sets, documents as data, and methods that promote collaboration and interoperability among colleagues around the world, but not only taking into account uneven distribution of resources, as we spoke, issues of connectivity, access to corporate solutions, but also by ensuring that control over the production of knowledge is in their hands. So not this idea of not decentralized owner of the data, some global north institution, but rather giving them the tools to maintain that stewardship. Okay, so now that after I've given you all of this talk and that we've kind of gone over some concepts and examples, I've got a little task for you so that you can start thinking through how we would apply some of these principles in a real life research and management scenario. And this task is going to relate to a case study of a research project that we collaborated with at DPS. So you've been asked to digitize a series of photographs taken by two sister anthropologists while traveling in Angola and Namibia in the 1930s. The goal is to make these photographs available to descendants and other users through a browsable, searchable repository. However, some of these images include problematic content, including naked bodies, dead people, and photographs taken from a colonial gaze. So one example here is that a lot of photographs are taken sort of from the back of individuals, bodies, so as to not show the face. And a lot of this sort of perpetuated this notion of kind of this homogeneity, physical homogeneity that was in accordance with ideas of race at the time. So lots of kind of these ideas, these ideologies portrayed through photography. So some considerations for you to take into account. These images are going to go on the web, where they may be flagged for content, and you have the legal right to digitize, share, and openly license. So my question for you is, what would you do? What sort of measures would you take? What infrastructure would you design? Would you share all the data? Would you hold off from sharing some of this data? What would be some of your approaches based on your own experience and on what we've talked about here today? So I'm going to open another poll. And okay, great. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes there to think through that. We'll go through some of your thoughts, and then I'll share a little bit about what we did in our case, and some additional considerations. Okay. So we've got someone, for instance, who would consult probably with these communities or descendants of these communities currently to see, what approaches they might think are feasible, so sort of emphasizing that sovereignty aspect. Employ co-creation methods. Don't show the dead. Add disclaimers, context. Okay. The annoying thing is that I don't know if oh yeah, I can expand some. We would need to define problematic in terms of the platforms we intend to use to publish. Okay. So perhaps there's a possibility, for instance, for different types of platforms that we could utilize that would serve specific different purposes. And yeah, this idea of adding additional information on the process that took place and holding off from sharing some of that data that is particularly harmful. I'm gonna wait for a few more seconds as we get more answers. Be sure to add as much context as possible. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it at that. And I'm gonna move over to our slides again. So I'm going to tell you, thank you so much for all your contributions. I think there's lots to discuss on those. And some of them are resonant with the approach that we took. Some of them even go beyond that. And we don't claim that her approach was sort of one size fits all or the correct one. So it's all open to criticism. But when thinking about approach, we're thinking about responsibility. So kind of holding their responsibility for the ways in which images could be used once shared on the web, on the sort of effects and consequences. So sort of that idea of perpetuating existent violent processes that would be under responsibility as data managers and sharers. We are thinking about authority. So sort of who really has the authority to decide what to share, what goes on the web, what is data that should be used for research, what is not, you know. We're also, however, considering the collective benefit. So benefit for various types of communities, researchers, for descendants, to anyone who might be interested in the topic at hand. So for instance, what we did was we shared the metadata online. So as some of you were saying, descriptions, different tags, even if the images were not. As you will notice here, in a lot of cases where we determined that the images were not fit to be shared on the web or posted on the web, we posted sort of this generic image of the bag in which the images were, alongside descriptions and metadata. And one thing, for instance, only where individuals were named, because kind of this idea of images taken from the back kind of led to this sort of dehumanization and anonymization of individuals. Only when we could find the names of people where these digitized photographs shared. And also this idea of publishing our thought process alongside the data. So if you look at this link, you will see kind of an extended sort of explanation on why we took these decisions and, you know, how they can be applicable to other contexts as well. And just one sort of resource that I wanted to highlight, it's this one. This toolkit is specific to digital cultural heritage collections. I saw it shared, I think, on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, but I think it's a really good sort of summary of different risk areas that might come up in the digital cultural heritage context and how to mitigate these. So just a resource. And they include, for instance, ethical considerations in terms of historically sensitive data. So yeah, I think that is all from me. If you have any questions, feel free to email us or reach out to us in our social media. And yeah, I think I forgot to put our email here, but I'll put our email on the chat. I'm sharing.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Perfectly timed and a lot to take in, and also a great example of the sort of breadth of the term sensitive data. It's very lot to take in for that. Yes, we'll open it up. If anyone does have some questions, please do raise your hand, unmute if you want. As mentioned, pop in the chat. That's the Q&A bit. Please do ask away. Or as the email's gone in, if you feel you want to go that way, I'm sure I'll be more than happy to respond individually. I did have one quick bit, letting people think of, you know, when you made the file browser that you had, how much was that sort of iterative, like, or was it a sort of trial and error, or was it you have to create it and have it set, because obviously you don't want to start having things ingressed into it where it's and then have to alter, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You need the sort of metadata element set
Yep.
fully, or is it still improving? Which is the best sort of?
Yeah, definitely still in the improvement stage, but I think the approach that we took was we came up with like a test data set that we would use as kind of our approach to getting the infrastructure built. So getting the file browser up. I mean, really, the file browser, it's already built. It's already an existing app that you can kind of deploy in your own contexts. But getting that infrastructure of, you know, the server, the hot cloud storage up and connected correctly, and giving also kind of like access permissions to people who, for instance, the uploaders, people who would be uploading other sort of leads in the project, testing out those login details for anyone who would be a participant, any community member who would actually be using this. And then after that, moving on to the stage of getting all the data up there, getting, you know, these volumes of data up there. So that's the stage that we are currently in, sort of getting all the data up there. But yeah, I don't know if that fully answers your question, but